Hello, everyone. My name is Parth Pithani. I'm your host for Robot Forward Warehousing Podcast. And today I am joined by the OG in this space called Kevin Lawton from the New Warehouse Podcast. I feel like he doesn't need any introduction, but again, for me, he's a very good friend of mine. We have been building relationship for last 5, 7 years now. It all started with a cold message that I reached out to Kevin, and he was gracious enough to accept it and have a conversation after that. So I appreciate that. We met a few times. We had a good dinner at Modex as well. I just feel like he's a great person to connect with, learn from, and just have someone on your dial list, if you will. So again, Kevin, I know you don't need an introduction, but a quick intro on your background will be really helpful.
Sure. Yeah. Parth, thanks for having me on, and thanks for those kind words. You're gonna make me blush here on the podcast. But yeah. I mean, our relationship started a couple years ago, and I think we kind of started with the from Nobot to Robot, right? It was
Yeah.
your podcast episode that we had you on the New Warehouse. But myself, I'm Kevin from the New Warehouse, as you said, and I've been in the industry for about 13 years now, in various different operations roles. Is how I started, with a primary focus on inventory control. Um, Done multiple new building startups, not necessarily by choice, just kind of happened to fall in succession that way. And done a couple different projects around software implementations, upgrades, some automation projects as well, and bringing technology into warehouses that didn't necessarily have so much technology previously. So in those 13 years, you could say that I've gotten a lot of experience, probably more than 13 years of experience, and not as much sleep as I probably would have liked to in those 13 years as well.
Isn't that common for
uh,
supply chain and warehousing folks?
yeah, absolutely. And then I've been doing the New Warehouse podcast now for 5 years, and Parth has been a previous guest, and I'm very
Yeah.
thankful for that as well. And really just focused on trying to bring more awareness to the industry on what's happening out there, what's some of the latest things going on, some of the technologies, best practices, just bringing overall general awareness to those people that are on the floor, or people just in the industry in general. And and I've been happy enough and lucky enough that my platform has allowed me to do that and expand my network, to be able to meet people like you, and also be able to learn more about the industry in general, which was really the reason why I started the podcast in the first place. And so, yeah, so I'm thankful to be on your podcast
Yeah,
now.
of
And I
course.
have to say, I said this when you announced it, but it's about damn time you started a podcast, Parth.
No, I appreciate that. No, and appreciate the push, honestly. Um, but again, and congratulations on the 500 episodes. It's not a small feat.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can tell you, I'm on my 10th now, and I can tell you it's a lot of work. So it's amazing how you made it happen, and the consistency and just the great conversations that and that's one thing I just for your knowledge, any new individual, new direct reports that I work with, I always recommend them here start with the New Warehouse podcast. Like,
Ah,
don't look at in blogs and everything. First, start with New Warehouse podcast because the insights that you get from like candid conversations is usually that you don't get in a published article. So I always just want to let you know that I am your ambassador out here in the market.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, and again, as I said, like you have seen a lot, especially, of course, as an operator, and as well also like I think last 5, 7 years have you as you have been on this journey about about the warehousing space, learning more about the warehousing space. I'm sure in this years you have talked to a lot of startups.
Yeah.
I have seen you featuring a lot of startup as well. You feature one of my startup services as well in the past. So I think I want to touch a little bit on that topic and just learn more about your perspective on it. And I think the way I come from an automation robotics world. I work for startups. I have a decent understanding of the challenges and how to solve for it for robotics and automation startups. But I feel like there are similar challenges and similar problems to be solved for beyond robotics and warehouse automation startups, I think. And I think that's where I want to pick your brain on, and that's what I want to have our conversations today around. So with that said, let me ask you the very first question. The first question
Sure.
is around, like, from a warehouse solutions market, right? New technologies are trying to enter market, new solutions are trying to enter warehousing market. From your perspective, as you look across your last 7 years, and then the operator for last 13 years, what do you see as the biggest challenges from a go-to-market perspective for the
Mhm.
new companies and new startups trying to enter the warehousing space?
That's a question there for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting because certainly, as an operator and someone that was working in the warehouse, and this is something that I've kind of, as I've been working on this podcast and the new warehouse itself, like my mind kind of realized that if you are in a warehouse manager, for example, or operations manager, maybe even a director of ops level, the exposure that you will naturally get to different solutions and technologies is pretty minimal, depending on the company that you're working for. I mean, if you're working for a company, especially a company that's just a small to mid-market sized company that's, been around for a long time, and, you're working there for multiple years, and they're not very heavily invested in the latest tech or innovation or anything like that. Like you're not going to get much exposure to like what's out there in the market. And I kind of realized that with the podcast. That's been one of the missions and the angles is like how do we create more awareness around what's happening for those types of people. But with that being said, I think some of the challenges for these startups is really to create awareness around themselves, and also I think really try and highlight what's different about them, right? Because I think that's the one thing where take for example like just a WMS, right? Companies like, well, I have a WMS, right? And now here's another WMS that just came out, and what's different? And it's hard sometimes, I think, from the marketing perspective where I go to a lot of conferences and trade shows, and over the last couple of years, I mean, it's like every other booth, like you're seeing the same kind of words being used, right? It's like, oh well, we're giving you like more visibility, or we're giving you more transparency, or we're doing orchestration, right? But like what does that actually mean for you as the company, right? Because there's different levels to all those different buzzwords in there as well. And I think that's one of the things for certain, like I've seen, is like how are you positioning yourself in the market to be able to, like, one, create awareness around what you're doing, two, like why is it important what you're doing, and three, like how is it different? I mean, you look at like you were at Modex this year. I was there, and if you don't really know what you're looking for, and you're just going there for some ideas for your organization, I mean, your head would spin. I mean, there's so many different options there, so many things in the market. Like how do I know like which one is which? And quite honestly, like this one looks like this one, and that one looks like this one, and they're different colors, and maybe part of it looks a little different, but is that really like a differentiator to my operation? Like what's going on there? So like how do you make people understand that? And I think, you know, overall, like the messaging for a startup coming into the space really needs to be around education. And I think they need to push education, understanding of like those operational foundations. And I think it's interesting because I had this conversation a couple times when I was at the work conference this year, where I was talking to a couple other operators, and we were, kind of, I guess, sharing stories about how we look at like salespeople, right? That just like show up at your warehouse, right? And typically it's like they're selling transportation, or they're selling, or it's like I guess I won't say their name to give them a free plug on your podcast, but they have first aid kits and cleaning things, and like they're showing up like door-to-door sales, or it's packaging or something like that, right? And and no knock to those companies trying to do that, but you send these salespeople out, and if you're like a warehouse person and talk to them for a minute, like whether they know about warehouse operations or not. And most likely, if they don't know about warehouse operations, like they're not getting past the door, right? But if they're like, used to work at this operation, this and that, like, that's like really a strong, I think, part of having a sales team too, as well, for some of these startups, is like, do they have some operational understanding, and can they translate how this is going to, work and help that warehouse or operations manager, or that operation overall, and what's that differentiation there? So those are some of my thoughts, I think, there.
No. Oh, that's great. I think what you said was, I think, similar to what I see, like the messaging.
Mm,
I was discussing with someone. I was like, yeah, I think I was on LinkedIn. I was talking on LinkedIn. I was like, someone actually said 900 UPH
mm,
for a robot, right? And it's great, 900 UPH. I would love it. And with a one
yeah.
robotic arm, it's gonna be a challenging one, because that's 4 seconds per pick, and in a real world, that's not possible. And that's a messaging mess up. At least in my perspective, is like, now if I'm an operator and let's say I'm a director of ops, see that flyer come across, like, wow, 900 UPHs. I'm doing 180 UPHs. I'm going to increase it by this much.
Yeah.
Let me send it to my VP of engineering. Like, hey guys, do 900 UPHs. And
Mm,
my director, VP of engineering, if he or she knows really well the engineering, they know 900 UPH is not possible. What that means is my director of ops already lost the credibility, not in a serious way, but like, hey guys, that's, yeah, 900 is not possible.
mhm.
900 is not possible for a system like where so what I'm trying to say, the messaging is very important. I completely agree. I also feel like some of the solutions that at least I have seen from the robotics world, I think they're being developed in vacuum. I think
Mm,
when they start working on it, they just feel that they want to solve for this. They solve for it, and now that use case A is probably not big enough use case, and then now
mhm.
they have the technology. They want to go and find a problem for that, and that's the always the wrong way in my perspective to do that.
Yeah.
So I think, to your message around like messaging, finding your UVP, unique value prop, having that awareness, and also like just developing for a product, for an actual use case, for an actual problem, and talking to the operators about it, are the same are some problems, I think, we can summarize that we are seeing across the solutions market, warehouse solutions market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point there, like the 900 UPH example, because I think there's some, I don't want to say necessarily problems, but challenges around some of like the marketing that goes out. Like it's almost like overselling the solution in some cases, because think about, you said like, this person, they see 900 UPH and then they go to their VP of engineering, right? Well, think about a company that's like mid market and doesn't have a VP of engineering, right? It's like, now I see that, now I'm
Yeah.
going to engage here, and it's like, oh well, in order to get you to that, well, now, you have to change your system, and you have to do this, and you have to rearrange your infrastructure, and all these different things. It's kind of like they're giving like this, ideal scenario where you've already fully optimized your operation and all these things. And I think, it's almost like these companies, they need to like peel back a little bit and like say like, okay, like, we're going to build you foundationally, and then we're going to build up to these different levels. And I think that's where there's a little bit of a gap in the market, in a sense, because obviously, we see tons of news around, the Amazons and everybody who've invested in robotics, and how many robots does Amazon have now? Like, it's an insane amount. But you drive down the road, like, you're in Georgia, I'm in New Jersey here. There's lots of warehouses where we are, and you drive down the road and you pop into just a regular warehouse, like you're probably not going to see much like products or automation, right? And they're just, like just starting to think about that, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's like where that, kind of tying it back to that education piece, where a lot of these companies need to start educating them. And I think it's interesting too that, you talk about developing in a vacuum. I've seen certainly where a lot of startups have seemed to pop up in the space because somebody had this idea around some technology, some solution, whatever the case may be. And then it was like someone suggested to them, whether it was an investor or advisor or something, that like, oh, I think maybe you could use this and apply it to like the logistics space. And which is very cool, I think, for our space, because
Yeah.
a lot of these cutting edge technologies are finding practical applications in our industry. So we get to kind of like play around or
Yeah.
see these cutting
Yeah.
edge technologies actually doing something that we can relate to. But at the same time, just because maybe like it gets solved, does that mean like you really have a product or solution that's going to like, be able to scale and go across like multiple different operations? And I think that's sometimes where that gets like lost a little bit. And you see, a lot of companies either like, they're not able to go the distance, or like they have to make some kind of pivot, because after, like you said, engaging with a bunch of operators and companies, now all of a sudden they realize like, oh, like they do maybe have something, but it should have gone in this way instead of that way, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the capital constraints come into play. So as you are
Mm,
talking about that pipeline, right? So you work with, for example, like for someone who doesn't have a VP of engineering, who doesn't have an internal validation, they get engaged with the robotics vendor, and the
mhm,
robotics vendor get excited because now they have a pipeline that they're working towards. But and to me, what I have seen is you start building up the pipeline with everyone, like everyone excited about the automation and robotics, but then you start running into this scenarios where to change the system, change the tech they have, or change the process they have. And now you start in each of those blockers, your pipeline, your sale cycle gets longer and longer. And now
mhm,
you are sitting on a pipeline which seems for $500 million pipeline, but it's honestly just $10 million pipeline. And even in $10 million, your close rate is, let's say, 30%. That's a $3 million pipeline, right?
mhm,
And what that means is like the sales team gets built up for a $500 million pipeline. So you're hiring folks, you're investing so much capital from a robotics sales team perspective. But in reality, you need to only build a team for, let's say, $5 to $7 million pipeline. So
mhm,
that what I found was like from a capital, like when they say robots are hard, like a physical hardware is hard, it's
mhm,
hard for sure. But at the same time, many what I have seen is like if you are being little, again, I'm not trying, I agree I cannot solve for everything, but what I'm trying to pass a message is like if you're a little bit more strategic and tactical with your deployment of capitals, and for a startup, like if you're $100 million startup or even just a $2 million startup, if you're strategic with your capital allocation from your go to market side, I think you can really make it more effective instead of
mhm,
building a team for $100 million or whatever your number would be, where your pipeline, that you're as a startup, not every opportunity that comes along your way is going to be the best opportunity.
yeah,
And just thinking out loud and being strategic is what I feel really is important for a robotics company. And the why I say that is like you have seen ourselves as well, right? We have a couple of robotics companies close down their business. And I think to some part is what they ran into these challenges. They
mhm,
promised big numbers to VCs or whatever whoever the investors are, and now they started building a pipeline. But as they got more and more tactical with started digging into their pipeline, they started really started seeing that, you guys know what, yeah, 100 million, but really the opportunity is 10 million, and only out of 10 million 3 million can sign up for it.
mhm,
So that actually, if you think about it, you're burning VC's money, a lot of VC's money as well,
yeah,
and then ruining some careers as well, because as a career you sign up for these startups and thinking that you're going to change the world, but unfortunately, because of not being little bit tactical with your capital deployment and this allocation. I feel like you're also asking people to just sign up for the big dream that you all have, but eventually it's not working out. So again, I went on a tangent there, but I think that's one of the things I feel we gotta think about as well from a capital allocation perspective. If you don't, if from a go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, and I love too that you're putting it in the perspective of the pipeline there, because I think that makes it so clear. Because I mean, you see, I've certainly seen like some of these one pagers or pitches or whatever, when companies are trying to raise money, and it's like, oh well, the warehousing industry is X billion-dollar like potential, right? But then, like, to your point, it's like, well, you have a very like focused or technical or like niche type of solution. What really is the opportunity there within that? Because I think it's, a lot of the startups, and I think, rightfully so, they go and try and chase some of the big brands, right? Like an Amazon or whoever who's heavily invested in automation and robotics. And, that makes sense. But then when you get beyond that, these more like market companies or companies that are just starting to look at automation, robotics, or even just, like going more digital with their operations. I mean, like, they don't necessarily have like cash like that to play around with. Right? So it's like when you get to them, it's like you got to give them something that's gonna work, because either it's gonna like not be good for you from like your business perspective, and it's gonna be bad for their business, which is gonna be like really bad, right? I mean, if you're a Dell or something, you got 3 locations across the country, and you go and implement something in one location, and it takes your location down, and you can't ship all of a sudden. I mean, that's a huge impact to your business. And I think it, like you said, I mean, you really got to develop that kind of product market fit before you fully go out there, and you're gonna save a lot of money for your business, potentially your investors, and then also for potential customers or pilots that you're doing and things as well. I think you got to really figure that out before you kind of fully go out there.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great perspective as well, because now I am like as a startup, and again I'm leaning towards startup because I think one thing, as you said, is very exciting that a lot of money is pouring into solving supply chain problems and
Yeah.
logistics problem, which is always good because we need that. We have a lot of problems, right? You and me both have been operators, so we know we have a lot of problems to be solved, and I think everyone is trying to help out, which is also great, which is always great. But at the same time, I think you touched on this initially, was like, hey, the crowd market is getting overcrowded. A lot of
Mhm.
folks are coming in, and I think you having that differentiator, unique value prop is very important. And I think if I can put some color on that, I think from a unique value prop perspective, I think you there are two ways to go about it. That is in my mind. One is like having, of course, different messaging, right? You want to make sure your messaging is actually effective, and you are not again coming back to 900 UPHs. You're not solving for 900 UPH, but you're actually solving for a real world use case where achievable ROI is there, achievable units per hour is there. I think the messaging is important, and I also feel sometimes your strategic partnerships are important as well, because if you go and partner with the biggest of the biggest, it's for a startup, you will always have, I would say, you will always believe that you will have a lot of opportunities. But when you are engaging with the biggest of the biggest, and if you are new on the block, the big ones big ones have a very specific budget, very specific resources that they can allocate to the startups. And if you do not make it into that budget and that bandwidth of that, let's say, Maersk or GXOs of the big worlds of the big 3PLs of the world, you're pretty much burning. You're coming to the next year and going to the third year, fourth year. For me, I feel like you want to, of course, partner with the best of the best, but at the same time, you got to be a little bit strategic with it. Because if I am, let's say, a recent example was around like slotting software. If I'm a
Mhm.
slotting software, if I'm going to go with the partners who are doing like tier one WMS implementation, it's going to be hard for me to, at least my perspective, it's going to be hard for me to sell for that channel distributor to sell tier 1 WMS and then also sell my slotting software, because
Mm,
my as an user, I'll be like, "You're already selling me the tier 1 WMS, why am I supposed to buy another software?" Right?
yeah.
But as a startup, it was good for me to partner with them because they are the best channel partner. But
Mm,
I think that's where the startups need a little bit more strategic thinking to that. Like, hey guys, you know what, I'm going to go to the, let's say, tier 2 or tier 3 WMS who are working on a specific niche, let's say subscription kit creation software, right? A WMS who does very good at subscription kit creation. Let me partner up with them, let me get some really good case studies out there, and then go up the chain. But I think that perspective is very much needed. And because a lot of startups are coming from non-warehousing world, I think that perspective is needed. And once they have that, they can get it really tactical with what they should partner with for this year, the next year, and the years after.
yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a great point there because I think partnerships are key for sure. But you know, is it a meaningful partnership and really strategic, or is it, sometimes is it like just a press bite, right? In a sense, and I think you have to get really creative there and think about, like you said, if a customer is going after a tier 1 WMS for your example, and they're already spending a lot of money on that for sure if they're going tier 1, and then they're like, oh well, I have to now come up with other budget for additional software, or like I'm spending all this money on this WMS, like it's not going to do this for me already, right? Or something like that. I mean, you have to get in the mind of like that customer and think about that. And I think to your point, like there's maybe a lot more strategic partnerships to be had where there's actual kind of actionable things, maybe more immediate actionable things, like for those lower tiers, as you said, because they're focused on something specific, and now like you're kind of adding on to that, right? And you're adding on for those customers that maybe like, okay, this specific need is really good for us, but now like we do want to take it one extra step because we need like slotting, like you said, for example. And I think it's interesting to see because I've certainly seen like the idea of partnerships like expands more and more, and I think if I think about partnerships, like, and like who I think does partnerships pretty well is like SVT Robotics. Like I would say, like they have a very very strong partnership network and system, and I think it makes total sense for them because they're helping to implement and integrate different automation, robotic solutions, and softwares, very easily. So it's like their partners are winning, right, and getting more out there. Like they're winning too, right, because their integrations can come into play, and I think they do a really good job of like nurturing those partnerships too, because they're always like promoting their partners. And I think that's one thing too that's like very important, is like how are we going to align ourselves with these partners where we're going to hype them up and they're going to hype us up, right, too, at the same time. Like we need to become cheerleaders for each other in a sense, right? And I think it's very important to be able to find those. Where do they align the most? And does their customer have a complementary need where my service would come into play, and vice versa too. And I think it's really interesting to see how that landscape has changed a little bit. Especially like since I've started the podcast, I'll say like even seeing, because I think like when I started, some of I mean, robotics was just kind of like, this is 5 years ago, right? And robotics was just kind of like coming in,
Mm-hmm.
and now like you see more and more of these companies like partnering together, like even to the fact where at a Modex or Promat, you see somebody else's robot in somebody else's robotics company
Yep.
booth, like, and how they work together, right? And I think those partnerships are key because you want the customers to know that too, like that, like it's not like this is the only solution I can have, right? It can also work with this, it can work with that, and I have variability and options there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's very important from a partnership perspective, as you said, because if I were to think about it, right, it's it's always good to have partnership from for the pipeline building, if you will. But I think from an execution side as well, like one of the things that I've seen in last 1 year, I would say, is like a lot of conversations have shifted from or are shifting, not from, but are shifting towards what are you going to do after I implement your robot? Like, are you going to maintain it? Are you going to, who is going to maintain it? Like the maintenance and the uh,
Mhm.
service contract conversations. And I think as a robotics company, and again, I'm just with my experience on the robotics side, I feel like a lot of companies do not have in-house skills or are not trying to develop in-house skill sets for
Yeah.
supporting all their install base, and that's understandable. I mean, it's nothing against that, but I think from an execution perspective, I think that is also where the partnership is needed, where someone can come and be do your like level one, level two servicing, and for level three, you have experts sitting in some part of the world help you solve for that. So I think that's also important from the execution part when it comes to strategic partnerships.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think, I've lived through a situation where the maintenance idea of maintenance was not necessarily strategically thought
Hmm.
about, I guess. And this was, putting in some automation. It was a shuttle system, and the company previously had been picking on paper,
Oh
right?
wow.
So we went from picking on paper to a shuttle system, conveyor, GTP, pick stations, voice picking, combination, like pick pass and pick streams. And so it was like, in within the course of like, I mean, like when we actually started implementing and getting into this new building, I mean, it was like over the course of, I guess, 6 to 8 months, like, going from paper picking to like this huge technology jump, right? And yeah, like maintenance was not something that was necessarily thought about by the company overall. And then when it was kind of like, the company that was doing the implementation and the integration and everything, was like, okay, like our contract's coming up, like we can train somebody on maintenance, like what do you want us to do? Or we can give you a maintenance contract and it's, X amount of dollars. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh wow, this contract is super expensive. Like, oh, we can figure out, like, train our one guy that we've had for so many years who does all the maintenance and everything like that, right? Well, this guy, I mean, very, very nice guy, but, didn't have that kind of technical experience to be, navigating a shuttle system and PLCs and all these different things. And that became a problem like very quickly.
Yeah.
We would get a jam on the shuttle or something. And, it was kind of like, he's trying to figure it out, but we're down for, or like one
Yeah.
of the towers is down for, X amount of time. And myself, like I was, up there, I remember like distinctly, I think that was maybe the moment when I was like, I don't know if I'm reaching my end here. It was like, I think it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was clearing a jam in the one of the towers of the shuttle system. And that was not, 1 o'clock in the morning was not my normal hours or shift.
Yep.
So I can explain a little bit to you the pain I was feeling there. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something like, what's the, it's like, yeah, we got it in place, and it's in there, it's working, we hit go live. But now, like, what does that look like over the lifetime? And I think, like you said, having partnerships where you can, either have a partnership for a service provider, a maintenance provider, and that type of thing is all kind of building like that ecosystem around your solution and your product. That's so important to be able to give your customer like the full experience as as you sat down and imagined it when you first kind of came up with this idea in your head for your startup, right? Like you want that customer to have the best experience possible. And you can't be everything to
Yeah.
everyone, and that's kind of like where that ecosystem partners comes into play, and you're able to kind of put that in place for them.
No, I think this conversation has been great conversation. I think we should. I mean, we are
Yeah.
recording it, which is good. I think this will be a great for anyone who is trying to enter warehousing space. I think they should listen to this conversation. I think they will find a lot of insights, and especially with someone who has been on the talking, like yourself, Kevin, who has experience across the board, and also talking as an operator, as an operator, and also talking to different startups, different players in the industry, and just helping them out. And I think one last point I want to do want to touch on is like something around like when we talked about developing a vacuum, and I think
Mhm.
that is such a important topic that people overlook. And I think we talked about like a problem to tool looking for a problem or solution looking for a problem is never a good place to be. So I think what I have seen is like, and similar like yourself, we get all these requests about, hey, can I run this idea by you, or can I run
Yeah.
this deck by you? It's great. I think it's to a certain level we always entertain that, but I think what I feel like startup founders need to figure out in a better way is like send 10. I'm just assuming right now. So any startup founder who's listening to me, let me know if it's not the right way to do it. But I'm assuming that they reach out to like 10 cold messages on LinkedIn. uh, Two of them reply. Out of two of them, one says, yes, I'll get on a call free of charge with you. And you don't even know if this is the right individual that you're talking to. I think it's such a waste of energy and resources on their end. And I just feel like there should be a better way for to do it. Like, do you see that is an issue, or just if you have to put yourself in a startup founder, what do you see they might be doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that because I get those same messages that you're talking to about as well, and yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see it, and I think a lot of my thoughts from earlier in conversation come from getting those kind of messages and having those conversations as well too. It's like we're working on this, and could you take a look? And it's kind of like I've seen some stuff that yeah, it makes a lot of sense, they're really smart, and then some stuff is kind of like it's not really like hitting the mark, I guess, so to speak. And even in some cases too, it's like, hey, well, we're doing this, and it's like, oh well, have you looked at company X, Y, and Z because they're doing something very, very similar already, right? So it's like, what's the differentiator there? And I think you know that problem, or trying to understand the problem or problems first, like before developing the solution. Like you said, don't create a solution, then try and find the problem later. I think is such an important thing as like advice to these startup founders too. And I think you know, it, and I will say, like, I'll give a shout out to, and we talked about him before we started recording here a little bit, but Chana over at Rabo, and also over at Two Boxes too. Like, I know that when they were trying to figure out something, like they went and they picked up like gig worker shifts to work as hourly workers in warehouses, right? To see like
Nice.
what's going on here, right? And I think, if you don't try to understand the problem at that level, like the operator level and people that are on the floor level, like what pains are they actually feeling? Like you're going to have a hard time like finding that product market fit and understanding like, do I have the right solution, or do I need to do something else? And I think, and obviously, not everybody has time to go and work as an hourly worker in the warehouse, or
Correct.
necessarily wants to, right? I think that's probably why we see a lot of robots in automation, because not a lot of people want to do that.
Right.
But at this, find a way to connect with people that have that experience and can tell you like, is this really like a pain point for me
Mhm.
that's gonna move the needle, or is this something where even like, yeah, maybe it's a pain, but like this is something like that I would never get traction or budget on to try and address, right? It's something that
Correct.
happens once a month, something that happens once a week, even is, it's not my biggest pain, right?
Yep.
And then it's kind of like, if you're able to talk to that kind of person, well, then you can be like, well, what is your biggest pain,
Yeah.
right? And start to understand and say like, oh, okay, like this is the problem here, like really. And being able to have those conversations and open that up. Like I talked to a startup recently too, and they went in one direction, which I think like their solution is very cool, something that definitely like solving a problem that I felt before. And but then the way they were going about it, and there was another like service that they could do, but they were saying we don't want to do that service, right? We don't want to work on that. And by doing that, like, you talked about pipeline earlier, right? Like they kind of closed off a lot of their pipeline by saying like, we're not going to do that. And then I guess someone pushed them to like, just try this, like, just try to add this service to it. And that like opened up so much more for their pipeline to be able to do that, and like got them so much more traction. Now they're like, oh, this is like a primary focus for our business, right? So it's like when you actually have those conversations with the people that are doing the things and understand and have access to that, you're gonna get so much more traction so much earlier on, I think, and probably avoid a lot of mistakes, a lot of money, as we talked about earlier, and be able to do that. So, but finding those people is a hard thing, right? And you need to kind of be able to I guess be in the right circles to be able to find those people and really get those understandings.
That's actually a great point. And I think to that note, what I'm going to do is, Kevin, I already took so much time of yours. I appreciate it. And what I'll do is, before we wrap up, I'm going to just quickly recap our conversation for any startup founder. Somehow it just turned into a warehouse robotics startup founder solution, whereas solutions provider startup founder episode. So I think we touched, yeah, and it's always good. Like when you start converging, and I think one of the thing I always tell a lot of my folks is like, podcasts are the really great way to have insights that you usually don't have it. So I think we started talking about the go-to-market strategies and how warehouse solution developers can really help around. And I think it just became a, I guess, 45-minute long conversation. So that was, so I appreciate you engaging on that. I think, and I think to recap, what we talked on was around like, as a warehouse solutions provider, you are in an overcrowded market, you have capital constraints, and stop developing in a vacuum, right? Those are the three key messages that we need. I think we can recap, we can summarize for them like, hey, it's going to be hard time out there. Just make sure you are validating your market fits, you are doing your right strategic partnerships, and of course have a good marketing messaging, right? And I think that's where I think you and me, I especially like your podcast, of course, and I'm starting to learn about this podcasting industry as well. It's always good to just talk on those topics and educate the industry around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the underlying thing, right? Is the educational piece and creating that awareness. And the more educated we can make the operator, the more potential better customers are out there for
That is
for the startup founders that we're talking to,
that
right?
is true. That is true. No, awesome. No, thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation, and as I said, you are the OG, so it was always great to chat with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You have been listening to Robot Forward Warehousing Podcast with Parth Pithani. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast player. If you like what you heard, please rate us and help us reach more warehouse robotics practitioners. Thank you for listening. Until next time.